just to keep that ambiguity going.
Well, I would just add that I think certainly President Obama would have wanted to avoid introducing any additional uncertainties into this, because for the first time really in memory, cross-strait relations are moving in a positive direction. Often, if the U.S. can just avoid, contributing to difficulty, that's a major accomplishment. And I think the election of a new president in Taiwan about a year ago, and the policies that the mainland has been pursuing, opening up economically, having in effect dialogue across the strait to resolve legal issues and so forth, is very positive and very much in the interests of the U.S. So I think there was a particular wariness not to get off the well-trodden path of familiar words here. I just might say more broadly, you mentioned the statement of which that was a part, but that November 17th statement was indeed a very long statement as they go. And I think there were actually some notable things in there that in the course of events one might talk about. It's the first time I remember, for instance, both presidents talking about the desirability of cooperating in space. Now, I don't know what will come out of that, and our respective security communities, both in China and the U.S., have their anxieties about that. So it won't be easy, but it's the first thing I remember. And then on the energy side, we agreed, both sides agreed to as I recall, 150 million joint investment on energy research centers, one each in each of the countries, and a cooperative research agenda, and a lot of other cooperation in the energy and climate change areas. So I think the Taiwan thing was well-trodden territory. Well, but there were some new things.
Yeah, and let me go to one of those new things. I was going to ask about, tick off some of the things that were in this joint statement, and since you brought up climate change and energy, that indeed was something of significance. We have a 10-year framework that we have agreed to in the past year or two. So cooperation, fine, but isn't this, it's easy to talk about research centers and the need to cooperate. Isn't the field of energy and climate change also a highly competitive future field? I mean, is there going to be some territoriality to this field, or do you envision that this cooperation is going to be of mutual benefit without any self-interest involved?
Well, I think every nation operates in its own self-interest. I mean, nations are a conglomerate of people, and traditionally we all operate in what we perceive to be our own self-interest. Sometimes those perceptions are incorrect, and when we think we're operating in our own self-interest, we're not really doing so. One thing I would point to is maybe the war in Iraq. Initially, we thought that was in our self-interest. I doubt very seriously that many American people would now say that was indeed in our self-interest. But I think both nations, as far as dealing with climate change, that is a win-win situation. If science is to be believed, and I believe the science, we've got to move forward as rapidly as possible in dealing with the problem of climate change. And already I think the Chinese are moving as rapidly as they can without diminishing what they perceive to be their economic progress, which is badly needed to maintain social and stability in China. But as I read the literature, I think China is now perhaps the leading manufacturer of photoelectric cells. They're moving forward very rapidly in wind power. They're trying to move ahead in other areas. As a matter of fact, they're moving ahead of us in many of these endeavors. And there will be some competition, I assume, as to who will be the leader in exporting and manufacturing all of these new greening techniques and greening machinery, for want of a better word. But in the final analysis, this is a win-win situation for both of us.
But I agree with all that, and I think to the degree we can have joint research and co-ownership of resulting technology, that creates win-win situations. On the other hand, we do have separate companies pursuing their own technology, hoping to, in fact, get copyrights and patents that become global standards, and they're probably not in a sharing mood with the Chinese if it's our American firm, or vice versa, a Chinese firm. So there's a competitive as well as a cooperative potential here. But I would say overall on the policy domain, there are lots of what I would say competitive elements here. China would like the United States, by virtue of our greater economic per capita welfare and our past pollution that they point to, would like us to assume the burden of transferring technology on a concessionary basis to China. And of course, in the United States, firms for the most part, own this technology, and they can't and won't transfer it on a concessionary basis. Also, China would like financial assistance on other ways of adapting to a world of climate change and so forth. And of course, I think it's fair to say the American populace probably isn't spending a lot of time thinking about how much they'd like to subsidize China on this set of issues. So I think there's that element to the competition as well. And then on the other side, there's the competition of who's going to cut CO2 emissions, how much. And basically the United States is talking about cutting absolute emissions. China is not talking about cutting absolute emissions. China is talking about more efficient energy use that would emit fewer emissions per unit of GDP. But potentially the Chinese basically want a line that allows them to continue to emit more CO2, and they want us to pursue a policy that will have us emitting less. And that's a fundamental conflict, particularly within our political system. So this is, I think, a really very good example of both the cooperative impulse in U.S.-China relations along with the competitive impulse.
But things can change. I remember it was not too long ago when the Chinese were saying, well, you know, you Western countries and the United States were the ones who you developed and polluted, and now we're trying to develop, and you're accusing us and pointing a finger at us for polluting. And if you want us to address our pollution problems, then you should subsidize. You should subsidize our efforts to do so because of we have the right to advance economically just as you did in times past. And I bring that up to say that as we move forward, perhaps the Chinese could change their attitude in that regard, just as they changed it from saying we should subsidize some of their efforts to clean up the environment. Because I say that for this reason. I think there's starting to be a general realization among world leaders, and it's getting down to the grassroots, that something has got to be done about climate change. And so we may have to get away from what is in our narrow national interest to look at what is in the universal interest at some point in the not-too-distant future.
And that could be the basis for the beginning of a beautiful friendship, I guess, between the United States and China, cooperation on that kind of cooperation. Just very quickly, an overall grade for the first presidential visit to China?
I think I'd give the president a B+ or an A-.
Okay.
I'd give him a B+, and I think the key is just what were your expectations going in, and I think we have to just push it a yard at a time down the field.
I would give him an incomplete, saying that he's just beginning on his agenda, and we'll hope to be seeing more of it. I want to thank both of you for being on the China Forum today, and I want to thank our audience for being with us. Goodbye for now, and we will see you next time.